Alright everyone, how are we all doing? Welcome along back to a brand new video, and today is a pretty mad one because this guy over here is on the channel. Forrest, how are you doing?
Okay. I'm well, brother. How are you?
Yeah man, I'm excited. This is quite a privilege to have you on the channel.
Well, you
Considering
came on mine. You came on the Wild Times podcast, so it seems like a very little thing to pay you back and come on yours for a second.
I mean, yeah, man. Like it's, I'm like I said, I'm privileged. It's a pleasure to have you on the channel. And speaking of the podcast, where can people go see that, hear that?
Oh yeah. Well, if they're fans of yours, then they probably already know that they can watch you and the rest of us on a very special episode of the Wild Times podcast. Get it anywhere podcasts come out. The audio, the videos on YouTube. We have a Patreon. I don't really know any of that works, but I do enjoy doing the podcast and loved having you on. That was super fun.
Yeah. So the links for that will be in the description down below. If you want to go listen to that, check that out. That would be grand. Now today we're going to be talking about the Thylacine, the Tasmanian Tiger, and
I've heard of it.
your your like thoughts on it as well, because I think like as far as like the world's concerned, everyone looks towards you as being the guy that can find these animals that aren't there or like aren't there. I wanted to start with right on a bit about you in terms of what like why do you search for extinct animals?
Ever since I was a little kid, Cookie, I've been really, really good at finding critters when other people can't find them. To the point of like, I would turn up things right in camp, like cobras and things like that, that people would be like, where did you get that? When I was like 12 years old, along with a guy named Brian Gratwick, a Rhodes Scholar, he was really the guy because I was 12. But we discovered a new species of catlet, a tiny little catfish. When I was like 17 years old, I redefined the distribution for, what's the common name? California coach whip here in California, which is this beautiful pink snake. Flagellum is the Latin name. We redefined the distribution for that. So I've just always had this knack of sort of turning up these things that other people couldn't find. That I have a bunch of biological training. And then, when it came to TV, well, when it came to my personal interests, it kind of like, I'm not a hunter. I don't really like killing anything, as you can imagine, but I guess I seem to have that hunter's instinct because the harder it is to find, the more excited I get by it. And what's harder to find than something that everybody else in the world says doesn't exist any longer, and I have a snuff of evidence that it might. So it just sort of all interests aligned from my childhood, my biological training, my tracking abilities, this fascination with the incredibly rare, the very last of, and all sort of funneled into this career.
Yeah, I mean like and people can see that with Extinct or Alive. It's two series, isn't it?
Yeah, 2 seasons. Yeah.
Is there gonna be number three?
Probably not. I moved home from Animal Planet to Discovery Channel. There's a bunch of changes there. Network TV is well, I won't say it out loud, but it's not doing great. They're losing to streaming and stuff. So I don't think so. I'm doing a new show now called Mysterious Creatures that's coming out next year. It's more about human wildlife conflict, which is another big passion of mine. Something I've testified in front of Congress about, and I've spoken to the United Nations about. So yeah, it's another thing that I'm very, very into is human wildlife conflict mitigation in a non-lethal way. And so that's what the new show is about.
Oh, okay, cool. I remember seeing a picture of you actually. I think like looking all suited and booted at one of those Congress hearings, and I've like, yeah, man, he looks ready to go. He looks ready for war right there.
Let's go, baby. Gotta fight everywhere.
So on the Thylacine then, what draws you to that? Obviously you're into the extinct animals, but like what is it about a Thylacine?
Yeah, so I'm not interested in cryptids, like the Bigfoots and the Nessies and those things. And it's interesting because I do like some cryptids, and I'll tell you why. Because some cryptid stories are founded in a reality of a misidentified animal, and that interests me. And that's the case with Thylacine in Papua New Guinea, by the way, and we can circle back to that. But so I say I'm not interested in cryptids, but I'm interested in the lore that's associated with certain crypto-like animals because they're usually founded in real animals. Anyway, all that to be said, the Thylacine is the most iconic Lazarus taxon to ever walk the face of the earth. If that creature was brought back, it would be, it was big when we found the tortoise, right? It was big when we got video of the leopard. But nobody outside of the several thousand people that watch my show, or whatever, few 100,000 people that watch my show, and maybe another 1,000 or two biologists even know what these animals that I typically rediscover are, right? every kid that grows up in Australasia, whether it's New Zealand or Australia and even a ton of kids from the United States, the United Kingdom, know what a thylacine is for some reason. It's got this iconic sort of a badge to it that people are drawn to. So anyway, so why am I so fascinated by the thylacine? One, it's an incredible creature. I mean, it's like a marsupial dog, wolf, kangaroo thing with this jaw and these stripes and this pouch. It's incredible. But outside of just that, implications for conservation are astronomical, because if you were to be able to find that animal, I think it would I feel like the world's at this like little tipping point where the needle goes like this, right? It's like bad, 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 good, 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 bad, 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 good, good, good in the world of conservation. Like, I feel like if we got the thylacine, and maybe this is just grandiose, hopeful thinking, wishful thinking, but the needle would go good, and like people would be like, all right, we can save stuff. Like, look at this, like this story of this animal that died out 100 years ago and it's now back, and like it hung on by a thread and people are saving it. Like, this is the story of hope to unite the world in conservation. I think that's probably a very lofty idea, but I feel like it's the species that's more capable of that than any other species on the planet.
Yeah, no, and I agree, and I definitely understand. Like, there's just something about it. It's mesmerizing, really, isn't it? Now,
mesmerizing.
On that, do you think it is still out there? Do you think there's possibility for that?
I go back and forth. You know, for a long time, my answer was like, yes, it's still out there. Like, people just can't find it and figure it out. And then I waver and go, yeah, you know, it's probably not still out there. Because this is like, you know, and this is the scientist in me fighting the romantic hopeful in me. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, my gut feeling is that there are still incredibly small isolated populations of thylacine that are functionally extinct. Extinct means it's gone, right? Like, it doesn't exist anymore, eradicated. Functionally extinct actually means it's still around, but it cannot function for much longer. Mm-hmm. Meaning, like, okay, there's a white rhino over here and there's a white rhino over here. This one's a boy, this one's a girl, but these two will never meet. So they're functionally extinct, because when one of these two dies, that's the end. Mm-hmm. Or the Rapidus turtle in Vietnam, like, there's three of them. You know, when one of them goes, that's the end. So they're extinct functionally. Like, they don't really have the ability to bounce back without human intervention. So that's what functionally extinct means. And my instinct, or that it's slowly dwindling, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that this generation is the last one. It just means that it's not coming back. Mm. And so my opinion is there could still be thylacine. In Tasmania, it's possible. In Australia, I do not believe so, but I know many people have reported sightings and so on and so forth. And in Papua New Guinea, I think is a high likelihood. And we can dig into the why if you'd like.
Yeah, so I wanted to pick up on the functionally extinct thing you just said then. Do you mean there could be some in Tasmania, there could be some in Papua New Guinea, and that's where, like, they'll never meet? Or do you mean, like, in the same place? Like, Tasmania populations or Papua New Guinea populations? Both.
So, I mean, I don't think that there's one in Tasmania and one in Papua New Guinea, and mm-hmm. they'll definitely never meet. You know, I think that maybe there's a handful of family units living in, let's say, Tasmania, for instance, even though I think that's semi-unlikely. Say there's a handful of family units living in Tasmania. Well, the lack of that habitat's fragmented, right? Because there's farms cutting in between them. There's fences, there's highways, there's this and that and the other thing. So those animals are disjointed from each other. And because of the habitat fragmentation and the fact that there's such a few number of them left, if they are still left, there's no genetic diversity taking place. So family group A and family group B aren't able to come together in Tasmania because there's the city of Hobart in between, or there's 35 farms in between, or, you know, whatever it happens to be. And so although there could still be one or two slinking around, very shy, very quiet here and there, and maybe they're having an offspring, so on and so forth, there's no genetic diversity. They're not mixing. There's not enough of a population. Cookie, if you and I, and we're both boys, but if you and I, say you're a lovely lady, you and I were the last two humans on Earth, right? And this is an Adam and Eve situation. We can't repopulate the Earth, contrary to popular opinion, because our children might be okay, but their children are going to be some kind of weird, messed up disease mutant, and so on and so forth, because we're not mixing with other genes. There's no more genes. It's just Cookie and I having a very round-faced, ugly kid. And
I don't know. It'd be very beautiful.
That's true. No, but You get my point. You
Yeah,
need that genetic diversity in order for a species to survive. And so I'm saying that there could be little groups, but they're probably not mixing enough for the population to ever bounce back on its own.
Right. Okay. So let's go to Papua New Guinea then. Considering that's what you say, what you think is the most likely. Why do you think that is the most likely? What's going on there?
So Thylacine once roamed from Papua New Guinea down through Australia and into Tasmania. Okay. Contrary to popular belief, the true decline of the Thylacine was the introduction of the dingo. So dingoes only came to mainland Australia around, I want to say 4,000 years ago. That could be wrong, but it's something like that, okay? And when dingoes came, they were better competitors. So dingoes are a mammalian carnivore. They are not a marsupial carnivore, right? So it's like your dog is a dingo. Now, they came with people that settled Australia. Now, well, that's the theory anyway. Now, when dingoes came over, they went, hey, this is great habitat, right? Like there's tons of wallabies to eat and there's these places to have my pups and my litters, and they outcompeted the Thylacine. So that's pretty much why the Thylacine died out from mainland Australia. Now, dingoes never made it to Tasmania. So fast forward 3,900 something years, and Europeans get to Tasmania and go, whoa, check out this thing, right? This Tasmanian tiger. Now, and then humans eradicated them through various reasons because they thought they were eating sheep and they put bounties on their heads and so on and so forth. So in Australia, they were outcompeted by dingoes. In Tasmania, they were pretty much hunted to extinction by people. But in Papua New Guinea, what you have is you actually do have singing dogs and dingo-like animals. But here's what's interesting. In Papua New Guinea, the habitat and the terrain is so diverse, and it's so dingoes are a plains animal, basically. They like open spaces and fields and things like that. Sure, they go into woods and forests and things, but their preference is for a certain type of habitat that was much more common in Australia, and they never made it to New Zealand, so it's irrelevant. Or sorry, not New Zealand, Tasmania, so it's irrelevant. But in Papua New Guinea, what you have is literally impenetrable jungles, unbelievable mountain ranges, things, and Australia's got some cool shit too, don't get me wrong here. But in Papua New Guinea, I mean, there are many mountains that have never been traversed in Papua New Guinea because it's just such a rugged, gnarly habitat. So all it would take, essentially, is for a group of dingoes to be in Papua New Guinea, singing dogs, whichever species you want to consider them, and them being like, okay, we can't actually cross over into this habitat. We only got here 4,000 years ago. But when we got dumped here in Port Moresby or wherever it is, Papua New Guinea, we spread out. But here's this insane, like the Fly River or one of these insane mountain ranges, and we can't actually cross over that. Well, Thylacine have been here for 10,000 years, 200,000 years. I'm actually not sure, and I don't know that we know the answer. So although the dingoes have been there 4,000 years and they've spread out and out-competed all the Thylacine over here, there's this major geographical barrier, whatever it happens to be. And on the other side of that could potentially be populations of Thylacine in a different habitat that dingoes aren't necessarily attempting to occupy. And because Papua New Guinea is so diverse, it's so impenetrable, it's so unexplored. And by the way, basically every biological expedition that goes to Papua New Guinea turns up new species. And about 2 years ago, maybe 3 now, they discovered a Highland singing dog that they also thought was extinct. And this is a whole dog, like larger than a Thylacine, living at high altitudes where people can get to by helicopters and things. And they're like, oh, hey, turns out the New Guinea singing dog is still here. And so that was a whole species of dingo, just similar to a Thylacine in size and everything else, that they didn't even know still existed, right?
Yeah.
And that went unnoticed in Papua New Guinea. So anyway, I'm going on and on, but at the end of the day, Australia is very modern. It's very first world. It's very developed. There's not a ton of people, but there's a lot of people in the populated areas. It's a big place, whatever. There's no proof. Tasmania, the Thylacine was not outcompeted by the dingo. There's still sightings popping up. But again, it's pretty modern. It's pretty advanced. There's a lot of people with trail cameras, things like that. There's our buddy Neil, who hasn't turned up anything since. And then in Papua New Guinea, you've got this gargantuan tract of land. I mean, it's absolutely enormous. It's segregated by geographical barriers. There are dingoes there, but they're probably they are cut off from certain habitats because the geography is such. And the thylacine had been there a lot longer. So as long as the thylacine was able to spread out more in their longer period of occupation, then the dingo wouldn't have been able to outcompete them in those various remote pockets, is my theory.
Right, okay.
Not to mention the fact that there is lore, there's cave paintings, there's all this like history of thylacine with the Papuan people.
So in terms of like recent sightings or stories or anything, have you heard anything about that? Because obviously over there it's got a different name. It's called something else, isn't it?
The moon tiger. And it's got its own name in Papuan, which I couldn't remember if my life depended on it. But have I heard any recent ones? So I do, and I should say did, because I don't track it as closely anymore, a thing where I used to plug in every single reported sighting of every kind of extinct animal. Where was it? I get all the details. I had this crazy map with like 16,000 data points on it, different color codings for different missing species. I mean, it was a lot of work.
Wow.
First of all, you have to take every sighting with a grain of salt, right? You and I both know that firsthand after dealing with our buddy. But I don't do that with the thylacine anymore, because if I did, I'd be plugging in like 6 new points in Tasmania and South Australia basically every other day, because there's just so much nonsense sightings that pop up that have no credibility. So as far as recent sightings go, no, I have not been tracking recent sightings. Papua New Guinea, the places in which a thylacine would be hiding in Papua New Guinea, people aren't going.
Right.
And if they are going, they're local people who certainly aren't reporting anything.
Okay, so in terms of...
Oh, I do have one.
Go on.
I have one, actually, I should tell you about, but you can ask me the next question.
No, honestly, go for it.
Okay, so I met this woman, blanking on her name. So she was basically single-handedly responsible for keeping the species of the Highland singing dog alive, the one I mentioned. So she had pups, she was breeding them, she was actually distributing them in the kennel club, in the pet trade, right? In a good way, by the way. It's not a negative thing. It's a very positive thing. Mm-hmm. They were very, very close-knit about who could have one, and you had to have certain requirements, blah, blah. It's a good thing because it kept the species alive. Well, she was an English lady, and she was quite lovely, an older woman, and she was obsessed with these singing dogs, which is rad, because everybody should have a specialty. But her point of contact that basically got all this information that these singing dogs were still alive in the Highlands was another young lady who was going to university in Port Moresby at whatever the university is there. She was a young local Papuan woman, and she was super cool. Her name was Rose. I remember that. And this is about a year and a half ago now. And so I started talking with Rose, and I asked Rose, a lot about, like, how did you find out about the singing dog? Like, where did you go? And she said, well, I used to go into these remote villages, right? And these remote villages would say, oh, there's 2 kinds of dogs. There's the striped dog and there's the singing dog. And, we didn't know what any of that meant and blah, 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 blah. And so, I gathered all of this data, and eventually somebody said, well, the singing dogs live up on this hill. And then I went up there and I placed my cameras and I worked with this university and so on and so forth. And boom, they got video footage of the singing dog. I said, well, Rose, tell me about the striped dog, right? And that was obviously a thylacine. She said, oh, well, they call it this name in Papuan, it means the moon tiger, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, well, Rose, tell me more. And she's like, oh, let me contact all of the people in these villages again and circle back to you, because my focus was always the singing dog. It was never the striped dog. And this is where the story gets wild. And I was this close, Cookie, to getting on a plane in the height of COVID and heading over there to try to figure it out. And so I get this email from Rose, and she says, hi, Forrest, how are you? Like, all these pleasantries, super polite. And I'm reading all the pleasantries, and I'm like, cool, cool, cool. And then I get to the sentence where she's like, a man in X village has a singing dog that he caught has a striped dog that he caught in the jungle a year ago as a puppy, and it's now his pet.
No way.
And I was like, excuse me? And she's like, I've heard from, and it's like Papua New Guinea. It's not like fucking Australia. You don't send a message on Instagram, right? Yeah. This is like a villager who doesn't speak any English, who doesn't have a cell phone, blah, 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 in the middle of nowhere, Papua. And so she's heard this from a friend, of a friend of a friend kind of thing. So I'm like, Rose, track it down. Please go there and find out if this is true. So anyway, the story gets crazier. So she starts trying, we're communicating constantly. I'm about to get on a fucking plane in the height of COVID to go to Papua New Guinea. by myself because I can't get a film crew. We can't get permits, nothing. I'm just like, fuck it. I'm taking my iPhone. And anyway, sorry, I know I'm waffling on a lot, but it's kind of an interesting story.
Just go, man.
So Rose is telling me all this stuff. So I'm like, Rose, track it down. So she goes from like 4 degrees of separation to 1 degree of separation, 2 degrees of separation. It's her talking to somebody who's a translator that has a cell phone that's talking to the guy who owns the striped dog. Okay, so we're this close now. Like she's literally, and she's telling me about all of this. So she tracks down all these people. She gets to it. Well, it's rainy season and you can't get to the village at all, period. Like the village is totally isolated. But there's cell phone service if this guy walks way up this mountain and then can send a ping to Rose, basically. And he's the guy who's talking to the guy with the striped dog. Well, the guy with the striped dog has 2 striped dogs, okay? Yes, his story gets crazier. Yeah, he has 2 striped dogs. And they're 2 puppies that he found in the jungle while out hunting in a hollowed out log. Now, anybody that knows anything about thylacines knows that they are burrowing animals that typically would pup in hollowed out logs or caves. So my mind's like getting blown. I'm trying not to like jump out of my seat. And I'm like, holy shit, this guy might have thylacine. And so I asked Rose, I'm like, what can I do to get a photograph? Like all I need is a photograph. Like I'll send a camera, I'll send a cell phone, I'll buy a cell phone for you in Papua New Guinea. You just tell me the cost. She sends me the cost. She sends this guy a cell phone. Guy disappears for like a month. And I'm like, edge of my seat waiting. He hasn't ripped me off. It's not like that scenario, but I just can't hear from him. Well, the cell phone tower in Papua New Guinea, and this is all true, you can look it up, went down that he used to set information with. The cell phone tower finally gets rebuilt or fixed or whatever. The satellites go back up. I don't know how that all works. And she hears from Rose. Well, in the 2 weeks between, it's all true story, apparently, allegedly. In the 2 weeks between when I said, let me buy you a cell phone and send it, the guy who had the dog died. Another village dog attacked it. Okay.
Right.
So he had so the 2 dogs thing became bullshit. It was only 1 dog. That was like a miscommunication. So I should have cleared that up. And so it was 1 striped dog. And he sends these details of it's got this big mouth. It's got the stripes on the back. The tail is strong like this. You know, he's like explaining all this in video and stuff. And I'm like, holy shit, this is it. So anyway, so I'm like, I'll send a video. I'll send a cell phone. So I pay for the cell phone. Rose buys a cell phone. You know, she has to hire a guy to hike the cell phone in because there's no roads, nothing. Anyway, so everything disappears for like a month. Finally, it comes back online, and I find out the gentleman who had the dog, another village in the period between when I said get him a cell phone, get him a photo, anything, and get it to me, and then I'll be on the next plane. In the period between that and when the cell phone reached him, the dog died. Because another village, and they live in villages and they're hunting dogs, and another village dog attacked the dog and the dog died. And I'm like gutted hearing this, but I'm like, all right, it probably wasn't a thylacine. Like I shouldn't be so ambitious and like ridiculous and hopeful. So I'm like, this is a weird thing to ask, I know, but can you send me pictures of the bones of the dead dog? And she goes, sure, you know, they actually ended up eating part of it and they buried the rest. Let me get pictures of the bones. Bones are practically destroyed. Lower jaw, which I did get a picture of, looks exactly like a thylacine.
Really?
Yeah.
Jesus, man. And that's where like you come with the Papua New Guinea thinking that's the place.
Yes. Well, this was I had already sort of thought that, but this was only about, like I said, maybe a year and a half ago. And so I'm still, I know exactly where that village is on a map. I'm in touch with Rose. I've told her if I'm ever going to go, like, this is where we got to go. I've tried to discuss the whole trail camera thing, but the logistics are so difficult because nobody knows how to operate a trail camera. And it's not that they couldn't learn that, but there's no laptops to process the imagery with. There's no way to get them in. Like there's no scientists there. Nobody's willing to go. I mean, this is the middle of nowhere, Papua New Guinea. And it's not like if I was like, hey, Cookie, you know, like, could you set up some trail cameras in your backyard and report back? You know what I mean? Like these are people that like have never used technology. They don't know the first thing about setting a trail camera. There's no laptop to process the files with. Like there's no batteries, you know, you couldn't replace batteries. Like they wouldn't even know how to set it or where to set it. So I've like had these ongoing conversations with Rose about, can you get there? Like if I send 100 trail cameras, can you put them out in the area? Blah, 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 blah. And she's like, you know, I just think they're going to get stolen or they're going to break them up or, you know, maybe they'll use them as like bowls because if you pull open a trail camera, it makes a nice bowl. Like it's just not going to happen unless you go. And so that was, and that was in the height of COVID and I still haven't been there for obvious reasons. And that was the story.
Oh, that is wild though. That's crazy, man.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think I knew about that, so I'm just sort of like, I'm a bit like blown away by it. You know?
No, I've never talked about it publicly because for various reasons, but because, it seemed so promising. And I was like, we got to get, what I didn't want to do, quite frankly, is a Neil Waters, right? We got it. We found a thylacine. I know where it is, and then you get there and it's some guy's brindle hunting dog or something like that. But anyway, to this day, I'm not saying it was a thylacine, but I have pictures of a bunch of charred, gnarly looking bones, and I have this lower jaw imagery that looks, and there, by the way, that for people that don't know this, a very distinct jaw. So it's not like I'm mistaking it with, the village hunting dog. And everybody in the village, I had all these conversations where like, it looks different to the other dogs. Its tail goes straight. It doesn't go down. It's got these ears. It's got the stripes on the back, like all these details that were very specific to a thylacine that I never gave. You know what I mean? I never led the witness by being like, does it have stripes? Does it have a strong tail? Like I never asked those questions, because I didn't want to influence the response. So I was like, tell me what it looks like. And I got all these details that were very thylacine-ish.
Bro, that's crazy, man. Like, can you not like just ring someone up and be like, give me some money, I need to go? Like, what? It's mad.
Well, that's a whole different argument, man. Like politics of so I'm financed by networks, right? By Discovery Channel in particular. And so, at the end of the day, a network's a business, and there's no business return for them to send me to find a thylacine, right? And that's the difficulty. And contrary to what people think about my success and everything, I don't have the kind of money to just, and by the way, I'd sell my car and go tomorrow if I thought I was going to get a thylacine, right? Like I have enough money to get there and figure it out, but without doing it properly, without having trail cameras, without having, the right equipment, so on and so forth, without financing an expedition properly, your likelihood of success is limited. And so I did bring this up to a couple people that are financiers of my projects, network people. They basically weren't interested. That was one of the reasons I needed that image to be like, look, here it is. This is going to be the biggest fucking discovery since Charles Darwin, and I never got it. So it's crazy. And I'm not saying it was a thylacine because who knows? Maybe I am a bad cell phone picture. I could be a different kind of jaw, even though it's very distinct looking. The stories could be super embellished because it's tribal lore and it's villages and stuff like that. So it could all be absolute nonsense. And that's the reality that I have to always remember when I get excited about these things.
Yeah, man. That's it's crazy to hear though. Like, thanks for telling the story. That's mad. Like,
yeah, that's an exclusive for you. Nobody's ever heard that publicly before.
Get in there, lads. No, so that's crazy. I was actually going to ask you because it's about this time last year you posted about the Mexican fella on Instagram.
Yeah,
and,
was that about a year ago now?
Yeah, and I basically wanted to ask, right, because when that came out and it was a bit like, what is going on? Is there a possibility that there could be thylacine as pets around the world, or like someone's got one and hidden one, and it's all like?
Here's another law. I hope you're ready for me to ramble off a whole lot more.
Go.
So, is there a possibility that there are thylacine as pets around the world? No, absolutely not. I think that's outrageous. I didn't realize that this Mexican kid's whole page was sort of spoofy, and it took me a little while, and I had to find a buddy who spoke Spanish, and I asked him hey, what's going on this page? And he's like, oh, this guy does ghost things and Bigfooty things. It's all nonsense, right? And then I was like, God, I wish I had never even shared that weird video because I felt like I had got duped, I guess the same way a lot of people felt about the Neil video, right? People felt like they got kind of duped, and I felt that about that Spanish kid or Mexican kid's video in the Mexican zoo. So I was like, man, that sucks. Screw you, kid. Don't do that to people like me. And I didn't get upset or say anything to him, but I was just like, that was silly. I should have never got my hopes up. Could there be thylacine pets around the world? No, definitely not. That would have surfaced. But here's an interesting tidbit for you. And I told you I'm occasionally interested in cryptid-like stories.
Yeah.
So, and you can look this up. I'm going to get all the dates and details wrong, but, and you can look it up and find it all. And I have it all written down somewhere. A long time ago, I want to say the 30s, maybe 20s. Again, I'm going to get all the dates wrong. A ship set sail from Australia to come to the Brooklyn Zoo. And it was carrying with it a whole bunch of different animals for the zoo that was going to go to the Northeast. I don't know if it was Brooklyn, but it was somewhere in that New York, Connecticut-y area, right? And as the ship approached, and there are records of this, the ship hit the rocks and basically crashed, and most of the animals died, and some escaped and were never recovered, right? Well, it is said and documented supposedly through the collector in Hobart that aboard that ship for the Brooklyn Zoo or New York Zoo or whatever it was were a pair of thylacine, okay? Now, here's where the story gets wild. Thylacine either died or their bodies were never recovered. They either died or escaped, right? And again, this sort of hit the shore, hit the rocks. It wasn't far offshore. A lot of animals escaped, apparently. Now, nobody ever found the thylacine. Nobody ever thought a big deal of it. Now, the United States Northeast is pretty similar to the south of Tasmania as far as habitat goes. Pine trees, it's cold, it gets gnarly in the winter, it's pretty toasty in the summer. The habitat's not wildly different. There's plenty of game because there's rabbits everywhere and things like that are not thylacine's natural game, but still something that a predator could eat. Now, where the story gets so wild is if you look at the timeline, and this, I sort of had this aha moment when I figured this out. If you look at the timeline of when the chupacabra, I said I don't like cryptids, started appearing in the United States, it was about 9 months after that. I think it was 6 months after that ship went down. And people were describing this demon-like dog with a giant mouth and this mangy-looking coat with stripes and patches and this stiff tail. And all of a sudden, these rumors of the chupacabra hit the Northeast, and people were seeing them, right? Now, if you think about what a chupacabra looks like, you think about what a thylacine looks like, you think about the timeline, you think about where it all took place, the idea, and I'm not saying that I necessarily believe this, but the idea is that thylacine escaped. People saw them. This is way before TV and fucking internet, so nobody knew what it was. And we're like, oh my God, it's a demon, right? It's a striped thing with this long tail and this big jaw making these weird noises. It's El Chupacabra because people from Latin America, that was sort of what they associated that imagery with. Yeah. And sure enough, up pops the Chupacabra. So I'm not saying there are thylacine running around New Hampshire, but and again, those would have been functionally extinct because it's like I said with you and I making the ugly babies earlier, right? Like it would have just been two of them. But the idea that maybe for a short period in history, 10, 15 years, there were thylacine, 2, 4, 6, maybe only 2, whatever. Maybe they had a few litters that ran around the Northeast and then died out is pretty incredible.
Yeah, that's pretty gnarly. I've heard that story before, and that blew me away as well. I was like, that's crazy to even think about that they made it over there potentially anyway. Like that's a really cool thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, anybody that's like, oh, I've seen a tube, because I get these kind of things all the time, right, on the internet and stuff. Oh, I've seen one. It's in my backyard in Connecticut or whatever. I don't think there's thylacines running around North America, period. But the idea that there might have been for a very short period of time is a fun fantasy to have.
Yeah, definitely, man. Now, more on like where they're supposed to be. Is it worth looking in Tasmania? Is it still? Should people still do it, or should people still look on the mainland?
There's no harm in looking, right? Now, that's the thing is looking is the key here, right? I did a project with James Cook University, which is in far north Queensland, and they're looking for thylacine, right? Now, they're sort of using that moniker as an ability to get financed and get hundreds of trail cameras and put them out in a grid and do fantastic conservation work that are wildlife surveys of the area, okay? If they happen to turn up a thylacine, oh my God, that's, bananas. But even if they don't, their looking is going to make incredibly valuable data with which the university can continue to monitor populations and things like that. So there's never any harm in looking, right? So put your cameras out there, see what you see. I had a kid drive up to meet me the other day. So I was doing a book signing event. He drove up all the way from where was he? It was like a 2-hour drive, all the way to meet me at my home in Santa Barbara, not at my house, but at this event in Santa Barbara. And he's like, can I show you this thing I caught on trail camera right outside my university? I'm like, of course. He's got these beautiful images of this mountain lion walking around his university campus.
Whoa.
And I'm like, dude, like I've lived in California for like 20 years and I put out thousands of trail cameras and I can count on 2 hands the number of times I've caught mountain lions, and he's got them walking around his university campus, you know? Yeah. And that's the joy of looking. Like, that's an incredible thing that he's found and cited, and that's, you know, it's not like that's not necessarily an incredibly valuable data point, but it's still really cool to know that these mountain lions, one of them was collared, so it's the one that they're tracking, were actually walking around this campus. I mean, like, that's incredibly cool. So, you know, looking never hurts is my point.
So I've got one more question. What are your opinions on Neil Waters?
The old bait and switch, huh? It's like I said on my podcast the first time when you were on and stuff. I actually somewhat agree with not the tone, but the idea that the Vice piece put out, which is like, it's good for, like, thank you, Neil Waters, for bringing the thylacine to the world, at least the attention of that animal. And I don't know if he's doing that for selfish reasons. I don't know if he's doing that because he actually believes it. I don't know if he's doing that because he's a tinfoil hat guy. Like, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. But at the end of the day, more people know about the thylacine and its plight, its extinction, so on and so forth, because of this wacky dude, Neil Waters. So while I don't agree with anything that he does or anything that he says, or the fact that he, like, has verbally attacked us and, like, does this shit on Facebook and, you know, like, done falsified sightings, and then they've been proven to be nonsense because of cat images, whatever. I don't agree with any of that. That's horrible. What I do like is the fact that more people on the planet now know what a thylacine is and its plight because of this wacky guy.
Right, okay. That's a very nice way of putting it, yeah. It's very nice.
Yeah, I mean, he's still a jerk, by the way, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like, he's totally a jerk. He's mean to you. He's mean to people that argue with him or don't, you know, he attacks the scientific community. He attacks Nick Mooney, who's a personal friend of mine. I've worked with him in Tasmania looking for thylacine. He's an incredible scientist, like probably the best bushman, and I'm going to upset some Tasmanians, but probably the best bushman in Tasmania as far as I'm concerned. And I mean, he's just an awesome guy. And for, you know, Neil Crackpot Waters to be making fun of him is like, that upsets me. But still, more people have heard about the thylacine because of Neil than they have because of Nick, probably, you know? So, like, that's a good thing. Like, people should know about this animal.
That is very true. And in all fairness, you're absolutely spot on with that. Like, as much as he is a bit of a knob at times, like, you are correct. He has brought a wider population to the thylacine scene. So,
right. It would just be nice if it was, and I shouldn't judge this because I've brought a wide audience to conservation, right? And other scientists judge me, and it pisses me off because they're like, oh, you did this wrong, or you should have done this methodology or whatever. And so I shouldn't say these same things. But at the end of the day, I wish he did it differently, right? And I think that's the problem. And that's the problem with the fucking scientific community. It's the problem with me as well, is like all these scientists think that their way is the right way to do it. I think my way is the right way. Neil's not a scientist, but he obviously thinks that his way is the right way to do it. And like, we should all be fighting for the same goal, which is like to bring awareness and spread the love of conservation and keeping animals around. So anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but yeah.
But it's a nice way to end it. So with that, thank you very much for coming on the channel today, and thank you for your insight and your stories. Mate, it's absolute madness. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem, buddy. Yeah, thanks, Cookie, and hopefully we have you back on the Wild Times podcast again.
Mate, honestly, that would be my pleasure. And but on that as well, don't forget to look in the description for the links to the Wild Times podcast.
Thanks, buddy. Take care.
No worries, mate. Cheers.